A person collapses in a seizure while someone holds their head, all on camera. A little further away, a group is beating drums, asking for forgiveness, over and over. In another room, someone is screaming, encouraging to go further, to let go. These images, they're real. They were filmed with a hidden camera. And behind these scenes, there's always the same mechanism, control. Today, we're meeting Benoît Jude again for the third time on StoryCube, because the first 2 episodes made an impact and because what he's revealing goes even further. Benoît Jude has been investigating cults and contemporary cult-like abuses for years. Not the ones from history books, no. The ones of today. The ones that hide behind reassuring words. Spirituality, personal development, healing, awakening. In this episode, he takes us inside these groups, where the line between reality and imagination is blurred, where crazy memories are created, where adults and sometimes even children are pushed to mental and emotional exhaustion. Movements that talk about energy, past lives, collective healing, but in reality, they isolate, control, and destroy. Investigations in France and abroad, recent cases, documented abuses, and one central question: how can ordinary people fall into this? If you think cults are a thing of the past, what you're about to hear might change your mind. Welcome to StoryCube.
Just before we continue, let me take a moment to talk to you about something really important. Let's be clear, your money sitting in your checking account is just sleeping. We can agree it's not working for you and it's losing value over time. That's how today you think you're saving money, but actually you're losing money as time goes by. Right now, the Livret A savings account is capped at 3%, life insurance is complicated, and locking your money in is often not very profitable. And as for crypto, everyone talks about it, but it's often really complicated to manage separately. So, to be completely honest with you, for the past few months, I've been using Blocks, and honestly, I wish I had known about it sooner. Actually, Blocks, it's a regular checking account, so literally, it's like where you leave your money lying around and it loses value over time. You get your salary paid into it, you pay for things with it, and so on. It's a checking account, except this checking account gives you a fixed 4% interest. You keep your money in your checking account, earning interest instead of losing value. I'll emphasize this detail because it changes everything. This checking account pays you every day. It's not like you put your money somewhere and get that 4% in 5 years. No, it's every day. You receive the interest payment. And the craziest part about all this is that there's no limit. Whether you have 500 euros, 10,000 euros, or 100,000 euros, you receive that interest every month. That's what really makes it different from the Livret A, where after like 22,000 euros or so, you don't get anything more. On top of that, there are a few features that I love. Notably, cashback on some of your purchases, premium Visa cards with no payment limits, of course, free instant transfers with no fees. And if you're into crypto, you can even buy more than 150 different cryptocurrencies on the same account with your own private key. So, the standard account at Deblock is completely free, and right now you can sign up and earn up to 500 euros. When you sign up, the link is in the first line of the description, and if you sign up with the code NOAH, you'll get access to 3 months of premium account at Debloqué for free. It's a gift, it's on the house. Even if you don't use crypto or instant transfers, simply keeping your money in your account is already the strongest argument, in my opinion. Now that your checking account is set up and your money is in place, let's continue with the video.
It's pretty psychologically disturbing because I don't expect things to go into a trance like that. The problem with these things is that when you fully believe in that energy, when you really feel it to the point where you start having convulsions, you can't doubt that when they pull negative things out of you, well, it's real actually. The drums you hear in the background, typically those are shamanic drums. Money returns, but it's not always the main goal of sectarian drift. Reviewing her recent history, she's attended many personal development workshops. Some weird stuff in unusual groups. You can hear in the video that others are screaming. It's not just that person talking in a trance.
Hello everyone, welcome to StoryCube. Today we're here once again with Benoît Jude. So, Benoît Jude? For those unfamiliar with the other episodes, he's a private detective who specializes in infiltrating cults. It's a unique job, especially if you haven't seen the previous episodes. Benoît, could you briefly remind us what you do?
So yeah, you summed it up well. Private detective, it's a bit of a stereotypical job. You know, private detective, people usually imagine us doing adultery investigations or things like that. You see, well, for me, right away, when I started out 10 years ago, I specialized in investigations, like you said, on cult-related abuses, on therapeutic abuses. More broadly, I specialized in manipulation. I work on this with a psychologist who works with me every day. Actually, that's what allows me to really specialize in this field, to protect myself and to recognize the mechanisms of manipulation. So, sometimes I investigate right at the heart of cult-related abuses.
That's wild. When you say you're at the center of cult-related abuses, do you ever infiltrate cults, or how does it work?
Yeah, that's right. I don't always infiltrate, like I said, because I don't always need to explain myself or infiltrate. We, private detectives, like I was telling you, we have two boundaries you see that we have to respect: necessity and proportionality. The justice system reminds us of that regularly. And so if I can find evidence from the outside, I stick to that. If that's enough, you see, to take my clients' cases to court with their lawyer. Because my job is to observe, to provide an investigation report that is admissible in court, and then to help my clients reach justice, often through their lawyer. Sometimes I don't need to go undercover, but other times I have no choice because I can't see anything from the outside.
So basically, that means clients come to you and, I don't know, they have questions about a loved one who has disappeared or things like that. And so you try to gather more information to do what exactly? Is that it?
Yeah, so basically I'm a legal expert, so I tend to have a legal reflex, when I take on cases, in addition to being a private detective. And my real goal is to help people access justice. Because it's not that easy with these kinds of cases, because by definition, we're dealing with psychological facts. So they're kind of invisible, they slip through your fingers. So for me, the goal is really to bring together as much evidence as possible so that we can then rely on the law to assert our rights. So I'm going to help people, for example, when they're worried about a loved one who has changed radically or even sometimes who has completely disappeared. They don't know what they're dealing with. So I've gathered information and tried to assert it in court. And then, of course, after that, I try to do everything I can with other people, other professionals like psychologists, to try to bring people out of the cult phenomenon when it's possible. But I can have other cases, like I was telling you, for example, cases where parents separate and one of them is involved in a cult-like drift and the other isn't. Well, you see, there's a question that comes up, which is it dangerous for the kid you have, the cult-like drift? So I go into it. Exactly. There you go. When you have a child together, well, the child is going to be taken care of by both the father and the mother, for example. Well, I'm going to check myself with the parent who has that belief without judging it, but simply to see if it could be a problem for the child. Because in France, we have a framework in the civil code that actually sets the conditions for education, emotional and psychological conditions and all that. And there are some subjects sometimes that are a bit destabilizing for the kids. I check, and I have a third type of situation with people who come to see me, who are sometimes former followers. Actually, people who have left a cult themselves are completely lost about how to rebuild themselves and how to access justice. Sometimes in relation to the things they've been able to reveal, and above all, how to position themselves in relation to the people they leave behind in the cult, who might still be friends with them, you see, so it's really complicated to deal with. It's a different kind of case that I'm going to handle, obviously differently from the other two, but all three, can be handled quite effectively as soon as you have evidence, actually. Thank you.
There's something I find pretty crazy. It's that before we started this video, you sent us some undercover footage. What did you do? All these clips, where do they come from? What exactly are they?
Well, I was explaining to you that I had accumulated roughly 10 years of hidden camera footage, because every time I go undercover, I use a hidden camera. It's not about the challenge. I do it because I sometimes stay a while and my memory might fail. So it already allows me to remember things precisely and also to review what happened, since things can sometimes move very quickly. Often, even if my report is admissible in court, it can be challenged. So people can say that I'm lying. Actually, the opposing party might find it too extraordinary to believe it's true. So if necessary, I submit my films, my videos to a bailiff. Well, a judicial officer, as we say today. And who verifies that my film matches my report? Because actually I keep my films confidential. I don't give them to anyone, usually not the client, lawyer or court, except in a dispute, so they can verify I'm truthful in my reports. And above all, it allows my psychologist partner to check the psychological effect herself, from the inside, to avoid it being biased by my testimony. She really sees, I was going to say through the eye of the camera, what happens from the inside then. The 3 clips I sent are, in the end, just 3 short excerpts from dozens of hours of hidden camera videos that I've collected over 10 years. And now, what I'm making, let's say public, well, semi-public, since obviously the faces are blurred. But I want people to come with me a little bit inside, to see what it's like from the inside, and so I can bear witness to it. Because today I feel that after 10 years, my role now is to testify about what I've experienced. Because I think that the phenomenon ultimately of therapeutic abuses and the abuses is rarely considered by the justice system and public authorities.
So you're presenting these videos as part of an Ulule campaign to fund a documentary, is that right? Is that more or less how it works?
Yeah, that's right. The documentary is meant to be the platform for these hidden camera videos. Of course, there will be more than just that in it. If I succeed with the campaign, that's great. If not, it's okay. I still get my message across. If I finish the campaign, I'll do my best on the documentary. And the common thread indeed will be these hidden camera images to explain what I've experienced over the past 10 years. And then to include other people in the documentary as well. People who know about the phenomenon, either because they've been victims or because they're experts in the field or even witnesses. Well, whatever people, in any case, who will analyze the phenomenon with me. And well, that's depending on whether this campaign, this crowdfunding campaign, is successful or not. But again, if I don't succeed, at least thanks to this project, I'm able to get a message across, little by little. And that's really what's most important.
We'll put the link at the top of the description. If you want this documentary to happen, check it out. Hi, this is Noah from the future. Just a quick note to say his campaign is over. However, it helped him connect with a production company in Paris to develop his project. It's wild, plus he published a book called The Mechanics of Control. Check this out, it's insane. Don't hesitate to go take a look. It's at the top of the description for those who are interested. Benoît, private detective, expert in infiltrating sex. Here we go. What I suggest is that we go back a bit to the first clip you sent us. It's this one. So what's happening with this clip? Are you there yourself?
This clip covers the infiltration I mentioned before, where things escalated quickly. As I told you, after about half an hour on the ground, it started just like that. In convulsions, because here you see someone on the ground who is literally in a convulsive trance. I don't really know what to call it.
For those who missed earlier episodes, can we get a quick recap of the context and how it happened?
Of course, yeah. So I signed up for a workshop actually, which is a paid one. Basically, it's something like $3,500 for the week. A workshop about what we call ki or chi in martial arts, you know, kind of like vital energy. They also call it, at that moment, Kundalini, since it's also connected to Kundalini yoga. So it's about inner sensations, surges of energy. I invite myself to this workshop through an open house opportunity, meaning I come to discover, you see, so I build up my whole cover story, my whole legend around that. In the context of an overall case file, where we have several belief-related themes, it's about a young woman whose parents no longer understand her path. That's exactly what I was telling you earlier, a family that's worried about a loved one who's changing. And here, typically, it's this young woman in her 20s who's brilliant in her studies up until now. But now she's dropped everything, abandoned it all, and they see her less and less, and they can't talk to her about her professional future anymore, or even about anything at all.
So they contact you saying, okay, I think there's a problem with my daughter. Are you able to investigate, get some information, see if she's safe or what's going on exactly?
We do the anamnesis, we go over the history of what she's been doing in her life lately, and it turns out she's done a lot of personal development workshops. Some weird stuff in some strange groups, things that people know about. You know, there are a lot of videos going around saying, yeah, if you want to get rich by doing nothing, etc. Well, you see, there are all kinds of things like that. And she started dabbling in that kind of stuff. And little by little, she bounces from one person she meets to another, and she gets into all kinds of beliefs like that, a bit diverse, varied, until she gets to that thing. For me, my main role is to admit I don't know at first and check if there's any cult-like drift. You see, in some families, sometimes I say, maybe the problem comes from your family, from within, without judging, because that's not my job. I'm not a family therapist. But when I feel that there's nothing external influencing the person who has changed, maybe the problem comes from within. So in that case, I let it go, they deal with it themselves, and that's it, pretty quickly actually. I can really feel that there are external influences on someone's view of life, the universe, medicine, and a whole bunch of things. If you want, still in the field of coaching and personal development, but really pushed to the extreme with what you see a bit in this video. That is to say, I focus on that moment to see, in that practice, what exactly is going to happen there, on the ground. I don't necessarily know, I don't know that I'm going to face that in the moment. I know there's something about energy since it's announced, so people will look for it. To feel this hypothetical energy, which really isn't backed up by science. I'm not saying science explains everything, but in this case, it's really very vague, and so...
It's kind of, you know, what they believe in.
Well, that's what you find a little bit in martial arts. That is the ability, kind of, with your body's energy to almost move your vital flow or even move objects. People, you'll see there are quite a few videos like that of martial arts masters who manage to push people, supposedly, without even touching them, thanks to this vital force that is inside the body, which would be invisible, but would still have an interaction with reality. So that's what is promoted a bit in the sect over there. That's especially what they promote. And they even go beyond that, because they explain that, in addition, this energy can make you sick if it's not properly calibrated in your body. I'll spare you the details. But as a result, they've developed a therapy around that to remove the bad energies. And, well, to heal you from various traumas you might have accumulated and that could have attached themselves to your energy, disturbing it and so on. What you're seeing in the video here actually is one of them, because there are a series of individual exercises throughout the day. It lasts a whole day, this thing. Well, it even lasts several days, but I only did a full day. This exercise is the morning exercise. We work like this a little bit with our energy around some music, and also with words that are repeated to us by the master from the day that you see in the video. Well, he's blurred, but the person who is above the other person, the one who is convulsing, that's the famous master. So they're all regulars. I'm the only newbie. I'm really the only newbie there. So you see, you have to get into the vibe by telling yourself it's complicated. You know, when you arrive on our side, but everyone already knows each other. So first you have to reassure yourself a little. You know, you tell yourself it's okay. I have the right to discover, after all, just like anyone else. But since it escalates very, very quickly like that, it's pretty disturbing psychologically, because I wasn't expecting it to go into a trance. People will feel something if they want to, because if you seek a feeling, you'll experience it. So I tell myself people might feel the heat rising from their feet, going through their body, all the way up to their head, maybe even purifying them. You see, whatever, I kind of get myself in the mood. But here, it goes really far. You can hear in the video that there are other people screaming. It's not just that person really talking like that. In a trance, there are 3 or 4 people speaking in trances. But at this point, I mean to the point where they're screaming, they're yelling themselves, they're spitting, they're throwing themselves on the ground, I took you out. Just for a short moment, but it lasts for long minutes, and several times like that during the day. A short moment where this young man is really having a huge, crazy convulsion. What's interesting about this sequence is that my hidden camera is on the ground. You can actually see it, you can spot me. You see a person wearing black pants with black socks, with little white neon stripes. That's me, and I'm right in front of the stage with my eyes more or less closed, you know, during this thing, because supposedly, you know, I'm concentrating. So I relive this scene through my camera. Actually, since she's really filming with crazy framing, how do you hide your camera, by the way? Yeah, that I keep to myself. Ah, right, because after that, it's not just about me, it's professional stuff like investigative days where you don't reveal all the tricks. There are many types of hidden cameras. And this one, super practical, really lets me move it around. Actually, as they say, I don't have to have it on me all the time, so it allows me to have 2 points of view. I use my own, the cameras, or another point of view if I have multiple cameras running, in case one fails. Here, I have a low-angle view of what's happening. At one point, I see this young man turn toward the camera without noticing it. His eyes are completely white, rolled back so far I can't see his iris. You see nothing at all, right? That's just to show you how intense it gets during that scene. If he isn't held back, because you can see there are staff members, there are people filming these people. They're not participants, but staff, the master's team there specifically to ensure the safety of participants. And especially for this type of participant who throws himself to the ground, in other words, he literally throws himself onto the floor and it's tile. If a staff member doesn't catch him in time, he crashes to the floor. I don't know if that's happened, but once or twice he did hit a bit. But at least they ensure a minimum level of safety in that regard. As for why it happens, I don't know. These are trance phenomena that we know about. Actually, it's an altered state of consciousness, and altered states of consciousness are quite well known. We know about these states when people use substances. I'll discuss that later. But we also see them under hypnosis, which is also an altered state of consciousness. But it can also happen in a pretty chill environment like shows. For example, I'll mention a hypnotist, a show called Mesmer, who gets people to do crazy things on stage. People there are clearly in an altered state of consciousness. It's not magic, but psychological phenomena and autosuggestion, where you simply let yourself go. And you have other phenomena like that during meditation, you know, or a phenomenon that's a bit well known, an altered state of consciousness that we all experience. I don't know if it's ever happened to you, but sometimes we drive somewhere for a long time and sometimes we don't remember the trip at all. What? We went from point A to point B, we drove, we took roundabouts, we parked, we left again. I mean, we did a whole bunch of crazy things and we don't realize it at all. Often while driving, we don't remember because we're on autopilot, an altered state of consciousness where our brain remains highly functional. And if something unusual happens on the road, we snap out of it, we remember where we are, let's say. But as long as the road is chill, when you go from point A to point B without anything happening, you hardly remember it. That's how it is, right? People just go along with that belief during that time, to the point of feeling this energy, this chi, so much that it makes them lose control. And clearly that guy who goes off like that, in that crazy trance, which lasts for a while, in that moment, I think, a big leap. 5 minutes like that kind of convulsion, the scene doesn't last much longer, but really where the guy goes into a crazy intense convulsion, it lasts about 5 minutes without him having time to hurt himself. In terms of the heart or psychological breakdown, it can be intense, but it's purely psychological since he didn't take anything. I can attest to that since I was there, and I know these people didn't take anything. They weren't fasting because, like everyone, they ate and all that, but they weren't on any specific substance.
So, what do you make of it then? What conclusion do you draw at that moment, when you're there on the spot?
Remember, I'm handling a case where I have to explain that their daughter got involved in some irrational things, and unfortunately, that's not all. I also told you last time that during that day, there are also individual sessions. So as I was telling you, where they extract negative energies like that, they work in pairs during these individual sessions. It's so intense. So I attended one, but I couldn't film it because my hidden camera was left downstairs. But it was so, I would say, intense in terms of noise that you could hear it downstairs. That's what I told you. People said others would think we're a cult because it's so intense. And so the problem with these things is that when you fully believe in that energy, when you feel it so strongly that you start having convulsions, you can't doubt that. When they pull negative things out of you, it's real. So actually you're going to be very tied, in fact, to the interpretation of what these negative things are, to whatever your therapist of the day says about them. If he tells you it's because, well, I don't know, you got screwed over when you were young at school or in your family, why would you question it? You had such a powerful feeling during those convulsions. You tell yourself, well, yeah, it must be true, right? We know these psychological phenomena well, and we know that at that moment we're in such a state of suggestibility and manipulation that you can believe just about anything. And at that point you can tell your brain, well, go ahead, let yourself go, yeah, tell yourself it's a memory, and if your brain wants to graft that as a memory, it'll make it a memory, you see? And with this double mechanism of a suggestion from someone you trust, who tells you that's probably why you're not feeling well, and this psychological phenomenon, physical phenomenon, this super powerful thing that is trance, well, you come out of it changed, right? It's hard to undo, actually, especially when you go through that for days. Because I'm telling you, this workshop lasts a week, so for a whole week, it's that kind of craziness. If you're looking for some well-being, because basically when you get into this, well, you have a vulnerability, or like I was telling you, people who fall into cult-like behavior. In general, it can happen to anyone. They're in a moment of wondering, whether it's psychological, therapeutic, philosophical, or like I said, spiritual. You're looking for answers? Well, if you're looking for answers, you're going to find them. Because there are so many different people involved in cult-like situations that you'll always find someone who has an answer to any question you might have, no matter how complicated it is. You'll find an answer. Is it true? Yeah, most of the time, no. And if you're unlucky enough to run into people who absolutely want to sell you their stuff, according to which, if you're not doing well psychologically and physically, it's because you had some crazy trauma when you were young, well, you're going to believe it, right? You have to rebuild yourself after that. And if it's not true, what do? You have to cross-check things. Imagine the family explosion that follows. I'm not questioning real testimonies of incest and similar cases. We know it exists, that's not the issue, but the problem with these fields which insist on going that way is they often make things invisible. Make invisible. With real incest cases later on, it's hard to tell real from fake, which is very dangerous.
And so then you go see the family. Do you tell them that you're dangerous, or do you tell them a little bit?
I never show the clips usually to people because I think it could be us, even just for the viewers. You see, it's already a bit violent to watch, actually. And for us, we don't really have any emotional attachment because these are people we don't know. Plus, you see, their faces are blurred, so we can watch it a bit from the outside. We might even think it's fictional, but I can guarantee you it's not fictional, it's not AI, and what if it was really me? But when people realize that it could be their loved ones, actually, who are there, sometimes even in the video, it's too hard to handle. So I explain to them that if they really want to see, well, we try to manage a time for it. I never share the videos, that's for sure. I might go through a phase where I let them listen a little bit first. Even just the audio, like last time when I played it with you, can be violent. I want to protect people as much as possible. But it's true that sometimes if they can't realize the danger their loved ones might be facing, I sometimes have to confront them as gently as possible and above all as much as possible with the support of psychology professionals, because honestly that's not my job.
If you remove this infiltration from one day, how will you handle it?
To be honest, I planned to stay 2 days and set aside my weekend, but it was so intense I didn't return the next day. Why is that? Because once again, well, I have my famous 2 boundaries, necessity and proportionality. There, I already had about 10-12 hours of footage with scenes like that, fake ones, I think. Well, that's enough. I know where I stand. For my family and justice, I need nothing else. So I'm not crazy. At some point I tell myself, damn, it's already super violent. I have what I need. I'm not going back. And so, well, it's still one of the toughest infiltrations I've had to go through psychologically because, well, I have some perspective. So even if I experience it from the inside and even if it's violent, afterwards I go back to a calm life and everyday life. I get my bearings again and it's okay, And then at the very least, I'm still supported by my psychologist partner who prepares me a bit for that. She won't say what will happen to me or inside, but she prepares me for the psychological effects, so I know somewhat how to protect myself. But what really strikes me is ultimately leaving people like that in there and thinking to myself, they, on the other hand, really take a hit, and they really take a hit. The next day, the day after, for a year, 2 years, and who knows how long. That's why I want to discuss this. I won't change the world, but I have something to say. And so that's also why I'm going to show you these images a little bit and talk about it with you, or through the documentary if I can do it, to say, damn, this is really happening out there. Okay, there's freedom of belief in France, that's not a problem, but do we really let it happen? Because on top of that, for this guy, it's actually dangerous, you know? Beyond the psychological aspect I mentioned before, physically, the guy, you never know when something could happen. He might even think, I'll jump out the window, my chi will protect me, you know, like in Dragon Ball, maybe I'll fly or something, yeah, and then crash. It doesn't happen every day, but when it does, how is it going to be covered in the news? Well, a guy who died, we're not necessarily going to, make the connection with like chi or the rise of Kundalini beforehand, right? Law enforcement would need to be highly specialized to grasp what happened earlier. That's not the case, which is why I want to mention it. I personally go with people to the prosecutor's office if needed. And sometimes in police stations or gendarmeries, they face officers who have no idea what they're seeing, but you can't really blame them. They're the police for 300,000 or 400,000 people, I can't remember exactly. There's an organization in France that trains them called Miviludes, which I mentioned before. Only about 10 members are really active, maybe even fewer. And the ones who are responsible for training the police officers and gendarmes, there are only 2 of them, so you can imagine it's impossible to train everyone. And on top of that, with the turnover, new people coming in, old ones leaving, you're left with 99% of gendarmes and police officers, who, I was gonna say, haven't even heard of Miviludes. Not even what I'm mentioning here, it's even Miviludes, they don't know what it is? Yeah, most people just don't know. Well, already that's a problem. But the fact that police officers and gendarmes don't know, when they're going to have to deal with victims who will talk to them about it, that's not going to work. You know it won't work.
There's a second clip that was sent to us, this one. This one seems pretty crazy. We see a kind of group playing drums, asking a bit for forgiveness. What's happening in this video?
Yeah, in that clip, it's definitely less impressive at first than the other one.
Yeah, it's still really surprising though. I mean, what's going on?
It's unusual, and at the same time, it's very typical of a field called shamanism. The drums you hear in the background, those are shamanic drums.
So,
shamanism, actually, it mostly comes from the East. I was going to say it's even spread throughout the world because you also have a lot of shamanic phenomena in the Amazon. Shamanism actually is practiced through the use generally of psychedelic substances, and then drums, because drums with their rhythm, well, you get closer to a trance state. So when you also take substances, it's kind of like a rave party, but it actually depends on the type of shamanism, since there are several branches. To reach the invisible world, which includes ancestors, nature spirits, and it could even be extraterrestrials who move through this invisible realm. So, you can reach them in different ways. Each belief system will have its own rites and rituals. The main rite in shamanism is drumming, and if possible, using substances. I say if possible because the psychedelic substances connected to these spiritualities are forbidden in France, a country that allows it on the basis of freedom of religion.
See, substances like that?
I can name 4 of them that are quite well known. The most well known right now is ayahuasca. It's not a substance as such, it's a preparation. Ayahuasca is a brew made from 2 different substances, one of which is a psychedelic. Psychedelic substances are psychotropic substances that are all hallucinogenic, more or less strongly and more or less quickly. Ayahuasca is a brew, you drink it like tea, it tastes bad, and people vomit a lot. The experience isn't for instant well-being, but for achieving something greater. There's another product that's quite impressive called combo. Combo isn't something you consume, it's a substance that's collected from the skin. Toxic frogs, small frogs from the Amazon, which are more or less colorful, they can be green, but they're better known for their color, sometimes very blue, very yellow. This substance is collected from the frog's skin and will be inserted into the body through wounds on the skin, usually burns. Additionally, a bit of combo is applied, which enters the body, causing severe illness and a deep trance. And there are two other substances that are well known. You have psilocybin, which comes from hallucinogenic mushrooms. You can take it, for example, in powder form or directly as mushrooms. And there's another one, mescaline, which comes from cacti, for example, peyote. It's the same, it's quite well known. You can find these things pretty easily on the internet if you know how to look, but I can't give you any advice. Obviously here I just gave an example of differentiated treatment. As a private detective, I can sometimes work in foreign countries. I rely on colleagues who are there because if you don't know the laws very well, it's better to rely on colleagues. But we do it a lot. I'm part of a detective association called the World Association of Detectives. That's the World Association of Detectives. There are 1,500 of us, I think, really, all around the world. And so, systematically, when I have needs, I turn to my colleagues. That way you stay within the law. The guy knows how things work there. And then I had a case like that, not this case, but a somewhat similar one. But it was another type of shamanism in Quebec, and in Quebec, the thing is, in France, it's strictly forbidden. Here I'll mention ayahuasca, but you absolutely don't have the right to possess, distribute, or consume ayahuasca. In France, it's forbidden. So a lot of people will tell me yes, but it's not super dangerous, and it's still a spiritual thing. So it's messed up that France doesn't respect that. Now that's not my personal opinion, it's my legal perspective. And in this case, there's a religion that uses ayahuasca. It's a bit of a quick comparison, but you have to compare it to the communion wafer. In Catholicism, you see, for a specific religion, ayahuasca is really like their communion wafer, meaning it's part of their ritual to reach communication with God and so on. They requested permission to use ayahuasca in France, citing religious freedom as a constitutional right. Of course, but in France, Miviludes stepped in, saying the risk of chemical submission is too high, which I've discussed a lot. So here in France, we refuse because there is a freedom that prevails, which is that of physical and mental integrity. Well, that's how it is. That prevails over freedom of religion in France because you also have the principle of secularism behind it, etc. In Quebec, it's a bit different in Quebec. They chose the opposite. They said, for us, freedom of religion prevails. It will be strictly regulated. But there are a few associations in Quebec that have the right to take ayahuasca and consume it on their own premises. And that's why I investigated over there, because I had a case to work on. Where is the person? Why did they come to see me? Simply because there are a few private detectives who specialize in this, even worldwide. That gentleman reached out because he believed I could best understand what was happening in their family. It's not just about that case, but about what occurs in shamanism with or without substances. So here, what you see in the video is without any substances, but still people go into a trance, which is going to be less extreme, of course, than when you take substances. But the drums bring you into a trance state that is not at all the same as what you saw in the first video. There won't be any major convulsions and so on. Impressive physical phenomena can occur with prisonnière, as it can make people extremely sick. Have you ever seen something like that yourself? Or is it more like, I haven't seen it myself, so since it's not allowed in France, well, it's much more complicated, so most people end up going abroad. Typically, a lot of people leave Peru. There are cases, people who unfortunately die in Peru. Actually, the reason Quebec chose to allow this on its soil is because at some point they thought it through. They don't have the Miviludes. For starters, they don't have an organization like that, so the issue of chemical submission and all that didn't really come up, nor did the issue of cult-like drift anyway. So they asked themselves a different question. They wondered, do we prefer that our citizens leave for foreign countries, where you might not have easy access to a hospital? Yeah, imagine yourself in the middle of the Amazon. If you have an emergency, you won't have a hospital 5 minutes away. And actually, they've had deaths happen exactly like that. A Quebecer in the middle of the Peruvian jungle, if I'm not mistaken, who was unfortunately way too far from a hospital to be rescued, and he died from consuming ayahuasca. Maybe before or after, I'm not sure, but I think it was after, maybe for that reason. By the way, a quick note, if people are interested in cult-like drift or these phenomena, I really encourage them to listen to a great podcast, a podcast by a Quebecer, that's why I'm thinking about it. I'm talking to you about Quebec. Olivier Benoît, better known as Pharmacien, started as a pharmacist and gained recognition under this nickname. And he did 4 seasons of a podcast that he calls Balado, because in Quebec that's what they call a podcast called Dérive. There's actually one about that episode, that event, about the guy who died in Quebec because of probably too massive a dose, and other things too, I think maybe because of sanitary conditions and other stuff. So there you go, I didn't witness it directly to answer you, because in the end it's extremely rare here. But in Quebec you see that it's much more possible since it's allowed there. Now, the particular thing about this video I'm sending you, about this infiltration, and it lets me explain to you, the thing is, physically, I wasn't there that day. Damn, I'm in the first and the last video. Sometimes I work with colleagues, since as a private detective, I'm not always alone. There aren't many of us who are highly specialized. I'm more specialized because I work with a psychologist, and I've done this for 10 years. But typically there are certain environments where, as a man, I'm going to have a hard time infiltrating. And in this kind of shamanism, you'll notice that it's women who lead the ceremony. It's not a coincidence, since this ceremony focuses on the sacred feminine, so my profile, being sacred feminine, didn't fit as well. Yeah, it's complicated. Sometimes you have guys who manage to get in because they want to work on their feminine side during the ceremony. They'll tell you that even men have a feminine side, you know? But here, clearly, the profile was much easier to fit through a woman. So here I really guided one of my colleagues, who isn't necessarily specialized at first, but I thoroughly briefed her so she could go, in quotes, in my place. But you see the ability of the hidden camera, almost as if I were there, knowing that I'm never very far away. And I have some of my hidden cameras that I can actually connect via Wi-Fi and as a result receive the video live, so I'm almost inside actually. So there you go. Clearly that day it wasn't me physically, but I was the one who handled the whole case from start to finish.
Is it you take notes? You take notes, for example, in this infiltration?
Well, taking notes, you can imagine that no, but you could. There is.
What do you gain from this infiltration? Do you share it with your family afterward?
The goal is always the same. Go inside if you can't get information from outside. Mainly to check everything that might look like signs of cult-like behavior. As I told you, in France, we're lucky to have that. It's not perfect or legally binding, it's still institutional, but authorities have defined cult-like behavior. People need to go check the website, and there are criteria. You have 10 main criteria, then sub-criteria, and my job is to look inside and see if I check those criteria or not. Then, I assess a threshold of risk for cult-like behavior, I pass that on to the justice system, and the justice system will work with the legal side of things. On the other side, we have a certain number of offenses, because cult-like behavior itself isn't an offense as such, it's what becomes an offense. On the other side, it's the manipulation in offenses that we call psychological suggestion. In criminal law, you can have other offenses, assaults, fraud, harassment, psychological violence. You have other common law offenses. I go there, I observe that, so I bring back information, and at the same time, I already have this part where I say, I'll tell you what's going on to reassure you or not. And first and second, I give you some tools so that you can file a complaint, possibly against that group and against anyone else. Who, in an organized gang situation, and that's really a legal concept too, would be considered an accomplice to all of this?
How does the sect make money, for example, this one in particular? Is there a special technique? Earlier you mentioned a workshop that cost like 3,100 bucks to get in. Was it the same mechanism here? Do you remember or not? Of course.
Yeah, we talked about it. It's kind of like last time. Money always comes up, but it's not necessarily the main goal. That's always the case with cult-like behavior. In the end, it's actually pretty rare. I have a few cases where it's really just pure scam. We talked about it sometimes in the coaching world where it's really a full-on scam, where the guys mainly set up a big pyramid scheme. Basically a Ponzi scheme, whatever you want to call it, but really you can tell that money is the main driving force. Sometimes that's not the case, but the guys still have to keep the machine running. At times internships are paid, like the first one I mentioned. In other cases it's more about voluntary donations. You give what you want and participate a bit. For example, in this case it was typically in a castle that belonged to them, but it needed some renovation work. It's fine if you're friendly with the sectarian group, you're already helping with the renovations. Physically, it's a form of payment, you see, and if you can't physically help because you don't have the skills, you give money to pay for the repairs. That can be the compensation, you see, it's not necessarily something directly connected, it can be indirect. Then you have a phenomenon of group conformity. If there's one person who gives, you'll be seen in a bad light. If you don't give, yeah, that's it. And if someone gives 500, there's an anchoring bias. You'll be seen in a bad light. If you give 10 bucks, if you don't have a choice because you don't have money, you'd only give 10 bucks. Okay, yeah. But if you have the choice, psychologically, if you can give more and you see someone else giving more, you'll give more. That's it, yeah. And really, payment in kind too. There's something that's institutionalized in some cult-like abuses. Now, I'm not saying yoga is a cult-like abuse. But on the other hand, we talked about it, with the case where we took it all the way, and where the person got 14 years in prison for living under psychological coercion. Basically, it's yoga, so there are cult-like abuses in yoga, and in yoga, there's also something called seva, S-E-V-A, simply put, and seva, actually. It's a manual offering that you actually make to the master to progress on your spiritual path. Okay, you're going to work like that, voluntarily, as much as possible, in your field of expertise. For your master, it allows you to progress. It's part of the spiritual work. I was going to say, it's pretty convenient for a yoga master who wants to take advantage of that. Yeah, that's it. If he wants to have his house renovated, or get his website done, or I don't know, his accounting. You see, these guys, they have businesses. True story, I really saw that. Oh yeah, they're not going to ask the guy, can you do me a favor? They're going to say, practice your seva, do it for me, it's your spiritual path. So you do my accounting, you cook, you clean. So that's another form of payment in cult-like abuses.
Want to do that? You can scam people like that.
They'll say it's volunteering. People claim they're not manipulated, that they act spontaneously and consent. But it always comes back to the question, how much are you truly consenting? To what extent were those women who were involved in that specific case and all said yes, really consenting? And here it's me saying this, not the justice system. The justice system considered that their consent was flawed, as they say. It was extracted through psychological pressure. Well, you can extract consent. Working people over, you know? I've seen it in other situations too. Let me give you another example like that, where you'll pay with yourself. Even if you don't have money, they'll still find a way to make you pay. Through WW-woofing is actually a pretty healthy practice. At first, you'll be welcomed by a farmer in exchange for room and board. You'll work for him, do chores, care for the animals, help in the fields, but you're mainly there to provide a service. The Mutualité Sociale Agricole, which oversees this in France, states it shouldn't be essential to the farm's operation, just a form of hospitality so the person can discover the farm and its work. I've seen guys working as woofers from sunrise to sunset, like slaves really, doing crazy stuff. If they weren't there, the place wouldn't run. Actually building houses, but also completely taking care of the farm and so on. They were real workers, but for free, so that's basically undeclared work. It's strictly forbidden, but if there's no inspection, nothing happens. This goes beyond the CEVA, as the law may call it undeclared work, which isn't allowed. Even if he's a volunteer, it's not just about helping out. Without inspection, deep in Occitanie, you really have to go there yourself to check the far end, you know? They usually have other things to do, the inspection services, whether it's social services or the police.
Maybe just to stay on this second video, in the end, did you think there were dangerous things in that sect over there, or not necessarily there?
What's also dangerous about shamanism, especially when you're taking substances, I'll go back to what I was telling you earlier. The moment you enter an altered state of consciousness psychologically, you lose your cognitive barriers. At least they're extremely weakened or even completely gone under the hallucinogenic substance. I've known people who told me from the inside, participants, they saw and spoke with extraterrestrials, or saw and removed demons from inside themselves, demons that were making them sick. Obviously, because it's always going to be connected to your life, it's not completely disconnected from your everyday life. That means at some point you come out of your altered state of consciousness. And generally you go there to find answers you're looking for. Like I was saying, answers because you're sick, answers because you're feeling bad, answers because you don't have friends. You may not know why, but you feel good in that spiritual family and they offer answers about life. It's always connected to your daily life since you return to it eventually. Well, what's dangerous is that it leaves huge marks. And you live in a society with other people, with colleagues, with your family, so it completely disconnects you. Well, after that, people might want to disconnect if they really want to. But if the rest of the family wants to keep having, let's say, normal relationships, family meals, things like that, it gets more and more complicated because those things are extreme. And you'll end up inevitably being drawn in toward this search for altered states of consciousness and then this search for sectarian drift, where you think that's where the real answers to life are. Not in the boring everyday life, I can understand that once again, but it's really hard to manage with your daily life behind it. And on top of that, without even going back again to what people can put in your head. You see, if you overinterpret, where does this demon come from? You see, you could have a guy like that. Imagine, you have a guy running the shamanism session like that. He's older, right? He's not going to get high. Usually not too much anyway, because he has to manage things. He has to be in control. Even just the rhythm, it's very codified, the rhythm in shamanism. Okay, so you see, you feel like you're hearing drums like that, just randomly, right? I don't know if these ones are good, for example, because I don't have enough experience. But I can tell you that it's very codified. The rhythms are even codified to the point where, depending on what you want to achieve, it's not going to be the same rhythms, it's not going to be the same beat, it's not going to be the same drums, it's not going to be the same skin tension. That's it. All of that is very precise. What I wanted to tell you to get back to that is that the person, since it's so codified, they must control themselves. High, actually, to be able to handle that rhythm, and usually they're experts. Shamans were traditionally the healers and knowledgeable figures in villages or tribes, understanding the future, past, and health. In shamanism today, this remains largely true. These are people who tell you how to think and what to do to heal. Now imagine what could be added then, with weakened cognitive barriers. If the guy isn't careful about the advice he's giving, he can go really far. He might say, don't follow your treatment, don't see the psychologist or psychiatrist, depression isn't serious, it's just stuff, don't take medication. If you're not feeling well, it's due to your ancestors, past life, or your brother now, so you shouldn't see him anymore, for example.
That's actually one of the criteria of cults that we saw last time. The fact of distancing, especially the person's circle and close family, etc., to try to ultimately isolate the person who is getting involved.
Yes, that's it, exactly in the criteria. You'll see there are a certain number of criteria. Obviously, not all of them have to be met for us to consider if it's a cult-like drift, but there has to be more than one also.
The main criteria, like that.
The main criteria are what you might imagine. For example, the first one, that's what was mentioned in the call. Mental destabilization, it's manipulation. The legal term, once again, is psychological suggestion, being placed in a state of psychological suggestion, more precisely, but anyway. So, just to tell you that if there isn't manipulation from the start, we can't consider it a cult-like drift. That phenomenon has to be there. The other criterion that comes up very often is breaking away from your social environment, family, colleagues, friends. You withdraw into yourself. In psychology, we recognize this as cognitive dissonance reduction without getting too technical. But it's just to say that at some point when you want to reassure yourself about your choices, you'll find excuses for yourself. And the main excuse is to say, if others think like me, then it's probably what should be thought. That's it. And so the group thinks like me. Gradually, you start believing only your small group thinks correctly, even if it's just 10 of you and the rest of the world disagrees. They're the ones who are wrong, they say, warning about outsiders. They're mistaken, we have powers, etc. We're telling you the truth. That's called social support, a psychosocial factor. So you often break away. It's not a coincidence if it's a warning sign, since this keeps happening. And then you can have other factors like any kind of scam, the use of language that's really specific to the group, really out of sync with everyone else. You'll have a particular way of dressing, a specific diet, and you'll also have criticism. For example, criticism of government institutions or the indoctrination of children. Many things are like that. If you focus on one criterion, you'll find it in many places. Having one criterion alone isn't enough to draw conclusions. It's a cult-like drift? No, because in that case, all political things and everything would just be cult-like drifts. No, it's really about a combination of criteria, and especially an analysis of the fact that in the end, it reorients you toward a worldview that is completely radical and destructive compared to living in society. As we can imagine in a democratic and republican country like ours.
There's a third video, a third clip that you sent us. It's this one. Oh.
But do you notice?
We see someone screaming, urged on by another. What's happening here? First, how did you begin this investigation and infiltration?
We had already heard a clip, not at that moment, but the clip you played last time over a black background. Back then, I only played the audio. We're taking it step by step on the same day and place, but with a different person screaming. But if those people are screaming that day, it's because that's actually the purpose of the therapy there. Actually, on that matter, that's the difference between therapeutic drift and sectarian drift. Precisely, it's that I'm straddling both. The difference between therapeutic drift and sectarian drift is that therapeutic drift will simply be, in quotation marks, you're going to steer people away from their conventional treatment. A treatment, let's say, that's somewhat scientifically based, that you would traditionally give in a medical, psychotherapeutic or psychiatric setting. Before, it wasn't necessarily a strict offense. You vaguely had the illegal practice of medicine, but it was a bit difficult to prosecute. Now, since 2024, therapeutic drift is an offense. It's now part of the penal code, as I told you. So when you steer someone away through such maneuvers, using pressure to turn people away, making them believe that medicine is really worthless and it's better to use our therapy. For us, a bit like the first example I mentioned to you, extracting energies and all that, it's forbidden today if you push people like that to go through with it. Any conventional medicine, whether it's purely medical, psychiatric, psychotherapeutic and so on, it's an offense today. Okay, after that, there should obviously be an investigation since it's a potential offense. So, very recently, sectarian drift is actually when, on top of that, you add criteria of mévidud, no stabilization, everything we've seen before about choices, breaking away, and so on. Therapeutic drift can turn into sectarian drift in the field of health. I usually review my case file, assess the situation, and ask myself what's happening, since we're clearly experiencing therapeutic drift. Because this therapy was created for people to follow exclusively, and as you can see, everyone involved is psychiatrically vulnerable. But even more so, you have serious psychiatric issues, major depressions, anorexia, significant psychiatric disorders. And so people go there for that, since that's how it's marketed. The goal of the therapy, actually on that day, as you can see, is to extract your emotions as much as possible, to express them to the extreme. At one point you hear a guy say, go on so-and-so, go on and all that. You're not telling him to use those exact words just to express his rage fully. At first, she's encouraged to do that. When she arrives, she isn't that angry. There are about a dozen of us, and everyone is very, very calm. We greet each other, we know each other, not necessarily. Here, once again, I show up kind of like a newbie. It's group therapy, actually. How do you manage to get into that, you? Well, I just mimic, that's it. Someone who has more of a psychological need than a psychiatric one, because it's hard to mimic a psychiatric issue, but with a psychological one, you can do it more. How do you do it? For that, I'm first seen in an individual consultation to explain my problem. I lack self-confidence, maybe there's something related to my childhood, I don't know what's going on. Basically, you see, I actually build up a whole complicated psychological history so that he offers me that's what I'm looking for. I don't want to trap him either, but I want to go. Because I know I need to check that therapy off in my file. I need to check that off in my file. That's what caused the problem. That's why my applicant's wife changed and trained to become a therapist for that. I can't know from the outside due to medical confidentiality, so I have to look inside. That's why I follow this path. By the second session, they offer that. They're still together, right? So the breakup was starting to happen, and then it was final. And I explained to him that given what I had witnessed, I would have a really hard time on my own. To get her to come back, to make her understand that maybe there were gentler therapies. Knowing that in those therapies, they push you so far to the extreme that you inevitably end up talking to your friends and family, and they say to you, what? Why are you doing this? Yeah, you're hurting yourself, you see, so you put yourself in a difficult position. People think it's weird. Well, inevitably, they tell you, I like it, I'm going to keep going. You end up isolating yourself from loved ones and may even push them away if needed. Unfortunately, that's what happened and is still happening, so we'll see how it goes. But for now, things aren't improving. I try things out, and as I mentioned, it really starts for me from the second session. I begin with something individual, but that's just to spark interest. I pay as if it's a consultation, but it's mainly to sell me something. So what's the cost? The introductory offer. In this therapy, it varies by client. Basically, you say your salary, more or less, and the therapist says, well, you'll pay this much. Damn, that's a lot. Okay, so for me it was $60, but for some people it could be double or triple, depending on what they decide. It's not posted anywhere, that's just how it is. And then you pay a second time to go to the next one. You pay for every session, and you even pay in advance, sometimes for several sessions. And they tell you right from the waiting room that you really shouldn't quit, because if you quit, well, it could be worse. That means you're going to commit to a path of healing, but if you don't see it through to the end, well, you'll fall back into something worse than before. Okay? Yeah, and they even tell you it'll be your fault. Quitting means the process expects you to keep going. If you quit, you haven't reached a good level, essentially, you're a loser. Basically, okay, yeah, well, so therapy is really about making you spit out as much as you can. Almost everyone who has done at least one session, even if they barely know each other, because I had calculated, but I think it's a good dozen groups per week, and each time there are 10, 12 of us in there. So that's about 200 people mixing each week, which is pretty huge in terms of numbers. Again, damn, I've been trying to calculate this the whole time. Since earlier, I can't get 200 people. So what does that make? Well, per week. Then you have 52 weeks in a year, so well, there you go. You multiply 52 by that, and you get a few thousand, right? There are even a few tens of thousands, actually, when you look at that number, and that's just one thing among many others. But well, maybe there are a lot of people who give up, who end up saying it's crap, it's not for me, and maybe there are some people who are less affected by it than others. But when you get yourself into such a state of rage, it's actually rare in our everyday life to really get that angry. Yeah, like what you just heard there. Also, you have to imagine that in this scene, it's a lady who is very kind, very fragile, who cries a lot when she talks about her problem. Her problem is a breakup that's not going well. And probably, because not everything was explained again, it's not the first time she's come, but probably at least some psychological abuse from her ex-partner, maybe even physical. So really someone who's vulnerable because of that. And there's a guy in the group who unfortunately looks like her ex and who said one word too many. Because actually, when people express their emotions like that, we all have to interact one by one. Okay, that means we have to say a little sentence to show that we welcome what you're expressing, right? Or I think you should do it like this. Maybe machine is right, it doesn't matter. You see, you respond, we have to, because we ourselves have to get involved in this group work a little. You see, we're here. We have to be a little bit in listening mode, not necessarily in a real exchange or interaction, but in a kind of emotional listening like that. Then this guy says, I don't remember exactly, something like we were actually good together, something kind of random like that. But for her, it totally threw her off because she took it as manipulation. From her husband, from Bruce, even though this guy wasn't her husband at all. And that's when she really starts to get angry at him. There's no physical attraction, meaning people aren't really drawn to each other. But I think she was this close to jumping on him. Because when you hear how angry she is, what she says to him, You also have to put yourself in this guy's shoes, taking all that in on that day, and it just comes out of nowhere. I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I think that when you're dealing with people who are mentally fragile, it can really have an impact. What we call decompensating, meaning you can really break down. For example, you see in the field of vision of this thing, unfortunately, I have to blur it out. That person, and there's someone in the field of view of this video. I'm the guy in gray, the one you see on the left, I'm not very far away. You see, there's a guy in a gray sweatshirt, that's me. And at the back of the room, you see another guy on the right. That guy, he's new, just like me. And actually, I read my emotions on his face because I saw myself seeing him completely shocked. And actually, I think I already told you about this case, about this situation. I had noticed that people were wearing headphones when I came in. Did I tell you or not? I don't even know. And actually, I told myself, you see, it's an urban environment, they have headphones, they're listening to music. I didn't pay attention. But actually, they were construction helmets, they were noise-canceling helmets. I later realized why they wore noise-canceling helmets. In the video, you can see them putting one on. Every session has people screaming like that. I didn't have anything. Him, you see that this guy, it's the same, he didn't have a helmet, no earplugs. And he must have ended up like me with crazy tinnitus. For several days, it wrecked my ears, and on that guy's face, I saw the same shock that I felt. Obviously, I couldn't see it on my own face because I can't film myself, but when I watched the hidden camera videos again, but even that day anyway, I caught it, he was like that, stunned by the scene. And that's exactly what I'm telling you. Someone who comes in with a vulnerability, because in his family, he experienced that kind of violence. You know, yelling, for example, parents who hit each other when you're a child, who scream at each other like that, really violent stuff. Someone who comes in thinking they'll find a safe environment to deal with that childhood issue ends up facing that same kind of violence. How does that guy go home during his own session? He didn't express that much violence because he came in like me, like us. But it's not easy actually to go into a rage like that. It's really rare actually to be that angry. You must have had to go in front of the others too, right? We each took turns. It's really a group effort. Everyone had to express how you do it. So when you go up there, you put yourself in someone else's shoes. For me, I just mimed that in a first session. I wouldn't be able to express that many emotions. In the end, it's actually easier. They told me they went through the same thing. At first, it's not easy and we're a bit shy. But you see, in the next sessions, you'll do the same. Like that, you'll scream, you'll hit everything on the floor and stuff. Well, I just had to mime that I couldn't do it. Because for now, I was also a bit held back by this issue of not being able to express my emotions well. It made sense, but some people who are more used to it did that. But him, this man, I really saw him break down in tears because he took all of that in the face and he wasn't okay. What actually? And he expressed that he also suffered violence when he was a kid. So for him, I think it was still fresh. He wasn't infiltrated, I don't think. I was really sad for him actually, but well, life goes on. And I thought for him, what he went through, maybe he'll never be debunked. Maybe he'll tell himself. It's normal actually, this kind of therapy, to just get hit with that for free. And maybe he'll go back and sink a little deeper into his psychological or psychiatric issues because no one will ever tell him about this therapy. It might not be cool because this therapy, well, I didn't tell you at first, but obviously it's not validated at all, neither medically nor scientifically. Obviously, yeah, the fact of screaming, it's good, it's true, but it's not controlled, not regulated, that's it. Some people will tell me, yeah, it's primal scream, that stuff, because I've heard that. You see, people will say to me, yeah, but why are you going to judge that? It's the same, people ask me why I judge shamanism if someone wants to take ayahuasca and all that. I don't judge, I don't care, but I just notice that in my cases, it causes damage. I'm not doing it just to judge, just for the sake of judging. I'm in a particular situation where I don't know at first if it has caused any damage, but I come in specifically to check that, and I really try to be careful not to fall into a confirmation bias. But when I see that, I say to myself, okay, it doesn't surprise me. That in my case, my girl, who's a bit fragile, she's completely decompensated. And on top of that, not only has she undergone this consultation several times, but she's also training in it to become a therapist herself, even though she has a very fragile profile. That's right. And in psychology and psychiatry, it's well known that to be a good therapist, you must first be healed yourself. You need to handle your own problems first so you're not too fragile, since you'll be taking on others' issues, which makes things complicated.
The worst things you've noticed while undercover, the worst damage you've seen in people.
The clips I'm showing you here, especially the first and last, are clearly among the most extreme. I was going to say psychologically because it's pretty intense psychologically, and even here you could say psychiatrically because once again we're only seeing a small clip of a few seconds. You see, it doesn't last long already, and you think, yeah, that's already pretty intense, but you have to imagine that this goes on for hours. In general, that's it over several sessions, and for some people, several times a week for years and so on. So, well, I think that's already violent. Even if it's not purely physical stuff, it's violent. Another thing I told you about, which I found physically pretty harsh, is the sectarian drift. Where I had been, where people didn't eat or drink, it's not like they attack each other, they don't beat each other up. But not eating and not drinking, especially not drinking in the middle of summer, that's harsh, it hurts your body. So, well, at some point there are some who do it, because physically you can't resist your body's need to drink or eat. But it's something that I think is pretty tough. I told you that as well, and now I'm quoting you again. Etienne Jacob, the journalist who did this too, like me, infiltrated similar things and wrote a book about it, among other things. But the person who infiltrated also testified like me. Even if you know it's nonsense when you leave, it still affects you. Because really they tell you that food lowers you, it messes up your karma, it lowers your frequencies. Like, it's really not good at all. So after that, you see food differently for a few days, but then it goes away, you know? And I think that's actually pretty harsh physically, because in this case, not drinking is extremely dangerous. It puts you at risk right away. You can really get dehydrated super quickly in the summer and end up with heart problems pretty fast when you're fully dehydrated. And if on top of that you don't eat, that's even worse. What?
Benoît, thanks again for sharing your experiences. Just a reminder, you're launching a Ulule campaign for a documentary about 10 years of infiltrating cults. We'll put the link at the very top of the description, of course. What is this documentary about? Basically, it's about infiltrations, it's hidden cameras.
The documentary is in the same vein as the 3 short videos, the little clips we talked about, so obviously there will be longer excerpts and a lot more explanations about what happened, where I was exactly, how I prepared it. Actually, I want to take people to the other side of the mirror. I made a short explanatory video, just a few minutes, to complement the first one I gave you. Really, I'm facing the camera and I explain why I'm doing this. It lasts 5 minutes, that's it. It's not very long, but I explain a bit about my approach. And my approach is unusual in the sense that, well, there aren't 15,000 people who have done what I've done like this for 10 years. I realized that today. So this somewhat unusual experience, I'd really like to share it with the general public, first of all, to bring people along with me to the other side, to see a little bit how it works technically as well, a bit about how you do an infiltration, how it goes and everything. And when you come out of it, what it can create, the relationships with others, the relationships with your family too, doing this, how it positions you in your daily life, doing this kind of job. And above all, at the end, and that's what I was telling you, for me that's the most important thing, and I think the message gets through a little bit, even if I don't succeed with the campaign. It's about saying that there's still something going on in France regarding a certain number of therapeutic abuses and cult-like abuses. There are many others I haven't told you about, ones I haven't necessarily infiltrated, but where I was also able to really see the problem, both psychological, human and legal, and I would even say societal, because it can cause problems at the level of society. It's about reporting on that. Through this documentary, through my main thread, my words, but especially also the words of other people who, along with me, would come as contributors. What I was able to encounter, victims, witnesses, experts, doing this in a long format, making it as educational as possible. So that together we can maybe try to raise a little awareness, do something so we can better understand the phenomenon at play.
He will also put a little card that now appears at the top right of your screen. You can click to watch the short video that Benoît made, which talks a bit more in detail about this. With that, this is already the end of this episode. Have a very, very good evening, Benoît. Thank you so much again. This was Noah Bye.